Every year, my family forgot to invite me to holiday gatherings. So I bought a penthouse by the beach. When they showed up with a locksmith to break into my house, they thought I'd be alone. They had no idea I had a lawyer, cameras, and the deputy on my side. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Marlene, and I'm 54 years old. For the past 15 years, I've been perfecting the art of pretending that being forgotten doesn't hurt. But this morning, as I stared at my phone after Patricia's call, I realized I was done pretending. "Oh, Marlene!" My sister's voice had chirped through the speaker, that fake sweetness she always used when she was about to deliver bad news. About New Year's Eve. We completely forgot to mention it, but we've already finalized the guest list for the party at Mom's house. There's just no more space, you know? Maybe next year? I had stood there in my kitchen, coffee mug trembling in my hand, listening to her rehearsed excuse. The same excuse with minor variations that I'd been hearing for years. My throat felt tight, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "Of course, Patricia, I understand." But I didn't understand. How do you forget your own sister when planning a family gathering? How do you run out of space in a house that comfortably seats 20 people? The answer was simple. You don't forget. You choose to exclude. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared out the window at the gray December morning. The silence in my small apartment felt heavier than usual. I thought about calling my other brother, Michael, but I already knew what I'd find. He'd stumble through some awkward explanation about how he assumed Patricia had invited me, or how he thought I wouldn't want to come anyway. They'd done this dance before. Many times. The worst part wasn't even the exclusion itself. It was the casual cruelty of it, the way Patricia delivered the news like she was canceling a dentist appointment. No apology in her voice, no acknowledgement that this might hurt, just a breezy dismissal of my existence in their lives. I pulled out my laptop and opened my banking app, something I'd been avoiding for weeks. The numbers stared back at me. $137,000 in savings. Money I'd been hoarding like a squirrel preparing for winter, too afraid to spend it on myself, too programmed to believe I didn't deserve nice things. For 15 years, since my divorce from Richard, I'd lived like I was apologizing for taking up space in the world. My family had made it clear that my marriage falling apart was somehow my fault, that I'd embarrassed them. The message was subtle but constant. Stay small, stay quiet, don't make waves. I'd internalized that message so completely that I'd shrunk my entire life to fit their comfort level. I lived in this tiny apartment, drove a car that was older than some of my coworkers' children, and never spent money on anything that might be considered frivolous. God forbid they think I was being irresponsible with my finances again, like when I'd tried to start that catering business 10 years ago. The business had failed, not because I wasn't talented, but because I'd listened to their constant criticism and second-guessing until I'd lost all confidence. "Maybe you should stick to what you know," Michael had said after I'd confided my struggles. "Some people just aren't cut out for entrepreneurship." Their words had carved themselves into my brain, creating grooves of self-doubt that grew deeper every year. I became the sister who stayed in the background, who never rocked the boat, who was grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. But sitting there this morning, something felt different. Maybe it was the finality in Patricia's voice, or the realization that I was 54 years old and still waiting for my family to decide I was worth including. Maybe it was the growing awareness that I'd wasted years of my life trying to earn love from people who had already decided I wasn't worthy of it. I thought about my friend Janet from work, who'd been begging me to visit her beach house in Wilmington. "You need to see the ocean, Marlene," she'd said just last week. "There's something about the water that puts everything in perspective." I'd always brushed off her invitations, making excuses about work or money or responsibilities. But really, I'd been afraid. Afraid that if I took time for myself, if I spent money on something purely for my own enjoyment, my family would have more ammunition to use against me. Afraid that they'd see it as proof of my selfishness, my inability to prioritize properly. But what was I prioritizing? A family that forgot to invite me to gatherings? People who treated my presence like an inconvenience to be managed? I opened a new browser tab and typed oceanfront properties for sale Wilmington, NC. My heart started beating faster as the listings loaded. Beautiful homes with panoramic water views, private beaches, spaces where a person could breathe without wondering if they were taking up too much room. The prices were steep, but not impossible. Not for someone who'd been living like a monk for 15 years, denying herself every comfort in the name of being responsible. I clicked on a listing for a penthouse condo. Stunning oceanfront property with panoramic views, private balcony, and beach access. Move-in ready, $250,000. My entire savings account plus a small mortgage. Financially risky for a woman my age. Completely irresponsible by my family's standards. The old Marlene would have closed the laptop immediately, horrified at even considering such a purchase. But the new Marlene, the one who was born in the silence after Patricia's call, kept scrolling through the photos. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking endless blue water. A kitchen with an island bigger than my current dining room. A master bedroom with a balcony where I could drink my morning coffee while watching the sunrise over the Atlantic. I picked up my phone and dialed the realtor's number before I could change my mind. Hello, this is Marlene Davidson. I'm calling about the oceanfront penthouse listing. When can I see it? The drive to Wilmington gave me 3 hours to think, and thinking was dangerous territory for me. It meant confronting years of accumulated hurt that I'd been pushing down, pretending it didn't matter. The exclusions hadn't started with New Year's Eve parties. They'd been building for years, like water slowly eroding stone until one day you realize there's nothing left but dust. It began right after my divorce from Richard. I was 41, devastated, and desperately needing my family's support. Instead, I got lectures about commitment and whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. My mother had pulled me aside after one particularly awkward family dinner and said, "Marlene, dear, you need to understand that divorce affects everyone. We're all processing this." Processing, as if my 15-year marriage ending was something they needed to recover from, rather than something I was living through. The first missed invitation was my nephew Tyler's high school graduation. Patricia called me the day after to tell me how beautiful the ceremony had been, how proud she was, how the whole family had been there. "Oh, I thought Richard would have told you about it," she'd said when I asked why I hadn't been invited. We'd been divorced for 2 years at that point. Then it was Christmas dinner. "We kept it small this year," Michael explained when I asked about their plans. I found out later from a Facebook photo that 18 people had been there. Apparently, small had a very specific definition that didn't include me. The pattern established itself quickly. Family events would happen, and I'd hear about them afterward through casual mentions or social media posts. Each time, there was an excuse. Each time, it was reasonable enough that I couldn't argue without looking petty. "We thought you'd be too busy with work." "It was really last minute. We figured you wouldn't be interested. You know how you are about crowds." How I was about crowds, as if I'd ever complained about family gatherings, as if I hadn't been the one organizing birthday parties and holiday dinners for years before my divorce. But that version of me, the one who belonged, had been erased along with my marriage certificate. The absolute worst was when my father had his heart attack 3 years ago. I'd found out from a neighbor who'd seen it on Patricia's Facebook page. By the time I got to the hospital, the entire family had been there for hours. They'd made decisions about his care, spoken to doctors, signed papers. I'd walked into his room to find them all clustered around his bed like I was an outsider crashing a private moment. "Oh, Marlene," my mother had said, surprise clear in her voice. "What are you doing here?" What was I doing there? Trying to see my father who'd just had a heart attack. Trying to be part of a family that had apparently forgotten I existed. Patricia had grabbed my arm and pulled me into the hallway. "He's stable. Don't worry. We have everything under control. You don't need to stay." I'd driven 2 hours in a panic, thinking my father might die before I could see him. And they'd treated my arrival like an inconvenience to be managed. But I'd stayed quiet. I'd swallowed the hurt and nodded, and pretended it was reasonable that they hadn't thought to call me. Because speaking up would have made me the problem. Speaking up would have made me the difficult one, the one who couldn't understand how families work. Now, driving toward the coast with the realtor's business card in my purse, I wondered how many years I'd lost trying to be the version of myself they could tolerate, how many opportunities I'd passed up, how many chances for happiness I'd dismissed because I was too busy trying to earn my way back into their good graces. The penthouse was everything the photos had promised and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows that made the ocean feel like it was part of the living room. A kitchen where I could cook for myself without calculating whether the grocery bill was too extravagant. A master suite with a walk-in closet bigger than my current bedroom. The building has excellent security, the realtor mentioned as we toured the amenities. 24-hour concierge, controlled access, cameras throughout the common areas. Residents really value their privacy here. Privacy, safety, space to exist without justifying my presence. I signed the papers that afternoon. The financing was more complex than I'd expected, but my bank account and credit score opened doors I'd forgotten existed. Within 2 weeks, I had a closing date. Within a month, I'd be living in a place where the ocean would drown out any voice telling me I was taking up too much space. I didn't tell my family about the purchase. For the first time in 15 years, I was doing something entirely for myself, and I wanted to protect it from their judgment and criticism. I could already hear Patricia's voice. "Marlene, don't you think that's a bit much for someone your age? What if you can't afford the maintenance fees? What if the market crashes?" Instead, I quietly arranged for movers, transferred my utilities, and gave notice at my apartment. My landlord was sorry to see me go. I'd been a model tenant for 8 years, never late with rent, never causing problems, always trying to take up as little space as possible. The week before my move, Janet invited me to lunch. We'd worked together for 6 years, but I'd always kept our friendship at arm's length, afraid of being too much, too needy, too anything. "You seem different lately," she said, studying my face across the restaurant table. Lighter somehow. I almost told her about the penthouse, but something held me back. I wasn't ready to share my new life yet. Wasn't ready to risk having someone talk me out of the choice I'd made. "I've just been thinking about some changes," I said instead. She smiled. "Good for you. You deserve to take up more space in the world, Marlene. You've been hiding for too long." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Take up more space. Had it been that obvious? Had everyone been able to see how small I'd made myself except me? That night, I packed the last of my belongings, leaving behind anything that reminded me of the woman who'd spent 15 years apologizing for existing. The woman who'd believed that if she could just be good enough, quiet enough, undemanding enough, her family would remember to love her. As I sealed the final box, my phone rang. Patricia's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, my heart jumped with the old desperate hope. Maybe she was calling to invite me to something. Maybe she'd realized how long it had been since we'd really talked. "Marlene, I hope you don't mind me calling so late. I just wanted to remind you that Mom's birthday is next month. We're planning something small, just immediate family. But I thought you might want to send a card." Send a card. Not come to the party, not be part of the celebration. Just send a card like a distant acquaintance who couldn't be bothered to show up. "Of course," I heard myself say. "I'll make sure to send something nice." After I hung up, I sat in my empty apartment and smiled. It was the last time I'd lie to keep them comfortable. Tomorrow I'd be gone, and they wouldn't even notice until they needed something from me. But by then, I'd be someone else entirely. Someone who lived by the ocean and took up exactly as much space as she wanted. The first morning I woke up in my penthouse, I thought I was dreaming. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting dancing reflections across the hardwood floors as waves rolled endlessly toward the shore. I made my coffee and stepped onto the balcony, feeling the salt air fill my lungs for the first time as a homeowner. For 49 years, I'd lived inland, surrounded by concrete and strip malls and the suffocating familiarity of a place where everyone knew your business. Here, the ocean stretched to the horizon, vast and indifferent and beautiful. It didn't care about my divorce or my family's disapproval, or whether I deserved to stand on this balcony drinking expensive coffee from a mug I'd bought without checking the price tag. The moving truck had left yesterday, and I'd spent the evening arranging furniture and hanging pictures, marveling at how different my belongings looked in this space. My grandmother's quilt, which had seemed shabby in my tiny apartment, now looked deliberately vintage draped over the cream-colored sofa. The small dining table I'd eaten lonely meals at for 8 years now sat in front of windows that turned every meal into a view. I was hanging the last picture when someone knocked on my door. Through the peephole, I saw a woman about my age with silver hair and kind eyes, holding a plate covered with aluminum foil. "Hi there," she said when I opened the door. "I'm Diana Fletcher from 3B. Welcome to the building." She was elegant in that effortless way some women achieved in their 50s, wearing well-tailored jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget used to allow. But her smile was warm and genuine, without the calculating quality I'd learned to recognize in social interactions. "Marlene Davidson," I said, accepting the plate. "Thank you. This is very kind." "Chocolate chip cookies," she explained. "My grandmother's recipe. I made way too many, as usual. Are you settling in all right?" I invited her in for coffee, grateful for the company and curious about my new neighbor. As we sat on my balcony, she told me she'd been living in the building for 3 years, ever since her divorce was finalized. "Nasty business," she said, stirring cream into her coffee. 27 years of marriage, and he decided he wanted someone younger. Someone who wouldn't ask questions about his business trips or his new credit card statements. I found myself telling her about my own divorce, about Richard's sudden declaration that he needed space to find himself, how he'd found himself remarkably quickly with his 28-year-old dental hygienist. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal, I heard myself saying. It was how my family reacted. Like I'd done something wrong by not seeing it coming, by not fighting harder to keep him. Diana nodded knowingly. Families can be the cruelest judges. They think they know the whole story from the outside, but they never lived it from the inside. There was something about her that made confession easy. Maybe it was the way she listened without offering immediate solutions, or how she didn't flinch when I admitted to some of the darker thoughts I'd harbored about my siblings over the years. "I haven't spoken to my family since I moved here 2 weeks ago," I told her. "They don't even know I left Charlotte." "How does that feel?" she asked, and I was surprised by the answer that came out of my mouth. "Liberating and terrifying. I've spent so many years trying to earn their approval that I don't know who I am without that goal." Diana was a retired family law attorney, I learned. She'd spent 30 years helping people navigate the worst moments of their lives, watching families tear themselves apart over money and children and wounded pride. "You know what I learned in all those years?" she said, leaning back in her chair. "The people who love you don't make you audition for it. Real love doesn't come with conditions or require you to shrink yourself to fit their comfort level." Over the following weeks, Diana and I fell into an easy friendship. She introduced me to other residents in the building, helped me find the best grocery store and hair salon, and gradually drew me into a social circle I'd never imagined for myself. There was Margaret, a retired art teacher who'd moved here after her husband's death, and now spent her days painting watercolor seascapes. There was Ruth, a former nurse who organized weekly poker games and told scandalous stories about her online dating adventures. There was Carol, who'd raised 4 children and now devoted her energy to elaborate dinner parties where the wine flowed freely, and the conversation ranged from politics to gossip to philosophy. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. These women didn't know about my failed marriage or my family's opinion of my life choices. They met me as I was now, a woman starting over, someone worth getting to know. But the peace I'd found came with an underlying current of anxiety. I knew my family would eventually discover my disappearance, and I wasn't naive enough to think they'd simply accept it. Patricia, especially, didn't like losing control of situations or people. That's why I made the decision to install a security system. "Better safe than sorry," I told the technician as he mounted cameras at the front door and in the hallway. "I like to know who's coming and going." Diana was with me when the installation was completed, and she raised an eyebrow at the elaborate setup. Motion sensors, high-definition cameras, alerts sent directly to my phone whenever someone approached my door. This seems like more than standard home security, she observed carefully. I hesitated, then decided to trust her with the truth. My family doesn't know I moved here. When they find out, they're not going to be happy about it. They're used to having access to me, and they don't handle it well when I make decisions without their input. Diana's expression grew more serious. What kind of access are we talking about, Marlene? The question forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. I told her about the pattern of calls whenever someone needed money, how I'd always been the one they turned to when bills were due or emergencies arose, how my refusal to answer their calls lately had probably been noticed. They'll want to know where I am, I said. And when they find out about this place, they'll have opinions about whether I can afford it, whether it's appropriate for someone like me. Someone like you? Diana's voice was sharp. What does that mean? I struggled to explain the role I'd been assigned in my family, the reliable one, the one who helped but didn't need help, the one who was supposed to be grateful for whatever attention she received, the one who wasn't supposed to make big decisions without consulting everyone else first. They think of me as irresponsible, I said finally, someone who needs guidance and oversight. Diana was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades dealing with family dynamics. Marlene, what you're describing sounds like financial and emotional abuse. The fact that you felt the need to install this level of security suggests you're worried about more than just disapproval. Her words sent a chill through me. I'd never thought of it in those terms, but as I considered my family's history of showing up uninvited, of demanding explanations for my choices, of making me feel guilty for spending my own money on my own needs, I began to see the pattern differently. What do you think they'll do when they find out about this place? Diana asked gently. I thought about Patricia's reaction when I'd bought my car without consulting her first. How she'd shown up at my apartment with Michael to stage what they called an intervention about my spending habits. How they'd made me feel so guilty that I'd almost returned the car to the dealership. They'll want to see it, I said slowly. They'll want to make sure I'm not living beyond my means. They'll want to have a say in whether I should stay. And if you don't give them that access? I knew the answer, even though I'd never let myself think it through before. They'll find a way to take it. 3 months into my new life, the call I'd been dreading finally came. I was on my balcony reading a novel, something I'd rarely had time for in my old life, when my phone rang with Patricia's number. I'd been screening her calls for weeks, but something told me this one was different. Marlene, where the hell are you? Her voice was sharp with anger, not the fake sweetness she usually employed. I went by your apartment, and some college kid answered the door. He said you moved out months ago. My stomach clenched, but I kept my voice steady. I moved, Patricia. I got a new place. You moved? Without telling anyone? What were you thinking? There it was, the tone I remembered from childhood. The voice that made me feel like I was 8 years old again, caught doing something wrong. But for the first time, I didn't automatically shrink under its weight. I was thinking I wanted a change, I said simply. Where are you living? I need the address. Need, not want, need. As if my location was information she was entitled to. As if my privacy was a privilege I hadn't earned. I'm fine, Patricia. I don't need anything from anyone. That's not what I asked. I asked where you're living. I could hear the frustration building in her voice, the barely controlled anger of someone who wasn't used to being denied information she felt she deserved. I'm living at the beach, I said, deliberately vague. The silence that followed was loaded with implications. I could practically hear her mental calculations, wondering how I could afford oceanfront property, jumping to conclusions about my financial responsibility. The beach? Her voice climbed an octave. Marlene, what have you done? How much is this costing you? Did you take out loans? Do you have any idea how risky it is for someone your age to take on new debt? I'm 54, not 90, and I didn't take on debt. I bought the place outright. Another silence. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was dangerously quiet. You bought a place at the beach outright. With what money? My money, Patricia. The money I've been saving for 15 years. Your entire savings? Marlene, that's insane. What about emergencies? What about retirement? What if something happens and you need help? What if something happens and you need help? There it was, the real concern. Not my well-being, but the possibility that I might not be available to bail them out of their next crisis. I'll be fine, I said. Give me the address, Marlene. I'm coming to see this place. We need to talk about this face-to-face. No. The word came out more firmly than I'd intended, surprising both of us. In 49 years of being Patricia's sister, I'd never simply refused her anything. Excuse me? I said no. You're not coming here. This is my home, and I didn't invite you. Marlene, I'm your sister. I'm trying to look out for you. This whole thing sounds completely irresponsible, and frankly, it sounds like you're having some kind of breakdown. A breakdown. Of course that would be her explanation. The only reason I'd make a decision without her input was if I was mentally unstable. I'm not having a breakdown, Patricia. I'm having a breakthrough, and I don't want you here. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline. I'd never hung up on her before. I'd never refused to give her information she demanded. I'd never set a boundary that clear and held it. My phone started ringing immediately. Patricia again, then Michael, then Patricia again. I turned it off and went inside, pouring myself a glass of wine even though it was only 3 p.m. Diana knocked on my door an hour later, concern clear on her face. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. I told her about the phone call, about Patricia's reaction and my refusal to give her my address, about how terrifying and exhilarating it had felt to simply say no. Good for you, Diana said firmly. That took courage. But I could see the worry in her eyes, and it matched the anxiety building in my chest. She's going to find me, isn't she? She won't just let this go. Probably not, Diana admitted. People like your sister don't handle loss of control well. When they can't manipulate you with guilt or obligation, they escalate. What does that mean? It means she'll find your address, probably within a few days. Property records are public, and if she's determined enough, she'll track you down. The question is what she'll do when she gets here. I thought about Patricia's history of dramatic gestures, of showing up uninvited to stage interventions and family meetings. I thought about the time she'd brought a locksmith to Mom's house because she'd decided Mom was too old to live alone, how she'd simply changed the locks and moved herself in as caretaker without asking permission. She'll want inside, I said slowly. She'll want to see the place, evaluate whether I made a good decision. She'll want to have a say in whether I stay. And if you don't let her in? I knew Patricia well enough to predict her next move. She'll find a way. She always does. That night, I called the building's security office and spoke to Marcus, the overnight guard who'd become friendly over the past few months. I need to add some names to my no-visitor list, I told him. Under no circumstances should these people be allowed up to my floor, even if they claim to be family. I gave him Patricia's name, Michael's, their spouses, even their adult children. Marcus took the information without question, but I could hear the curiosity in his voice. Everything all right, Ms. Davidson? Just some family drama, I said, trying to sound casual. You know how it is. But as I hung up, I realized that casual family drama was probably not the right term for what was coming. Patricia had sounded truly angry on the phone, not just frustrated or concerned. She'd sounded like someone whose authority had been challenged in a way she wouldn't tolerate. 2 days later, Diana knocked on my door with a grim expression. Marlene, I think you should see this. She handed me her phone, open to a Facebook page I didn't recognize. But the profile picture was unmistakably Patricia, and the recent posts made my blood run cold. Trying to track down my sister who seems to have disappeared. She's been acting erratically lately, and we're concerned for her safety. If anyone has information about Marlene Davidson, please reach out. Below that, another post. Family meeting tonight to discuss Marlene's situation. We can't just let her destroy her life without trying to help. And finally, the most recent post, dated just an hour ago. Found her. She's made some very poor decisions, but family doesn't give up on family. Time for some tough love. She found your address, Diana said quietly, and it sounds like she's not coming alone. I stared at the posts, feeling the walls of my new life closing in, the peace I'd found, the sense of belonging, the freedom to make my own choices without justifying them to anyone. It was all about to be tested. "What do I do?" I asked. Diana's expression was serious, professional. The lawyer in her was already thinking several moves ahead. "First, we document everything. Screenshot those posts, save any texts or voicemails. Second, we make sure your security system is working properly. And third," she paused, meeting my eyes directly, "we call my friend at the sheriff's department and give him a heads up that you might need assistance with some unwanted visitors." "You think it'll come to that?" "Marlene, your sister just publicly announced her intention to force her way into your life because she disagrees with your choices. She's gathering other family members for what she's calling a family meeting about you, without your consent or participation. This isn't about concern for your well-being. This is about control." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We'll be there tomorrow evening. Be ready to talk." No signature, but I knew it was Patricia. She'd found me, just as Diana had predicted, and she was coming with backup. They came at 7:30 in the evening, just as the sun was setting over the ocean. I watched them from my living room window as 3 cars pulled into the visitor parking area. Patricia's silver SUV, Michael's black sedan, and a white van I didn't recognize. My security cameras captured everything in high definition. Patricia emerged from her car first, wearing the stern expression she'd perfected during her years as a middle school principal. Michael followed, looking uncomfortable, but determined. From the van came Patricia's husband, David, Michael's wife, Jennifer, and a man I'd never seen before carrying what looked like a toolbox. Diana was with me, having insisted on staying for moral support. We'd spent the day preparing, documenting everything, and making sure my security system was functioning perfectly. Deputy Sheriff Tom Bradley, Diana's friend, was on standby, having promised to respond immediately if we called. "Who's the guy with the toolbox?" Diana asked, studying my phone screen where the security feed was displayed. My stomach dropped as I recognized what was happening. "I think it's a locksmith." Diana's face hardened. "They're planning to force their way in." We watched as the group huddled in the parking lot, Patricia gesturing animatedly while pointing toward the building. Even through the security camera, I could see the determination in her posture, the way she commanded the attention of the others like a general briefing her troops. My phone buzzed with a call from Patricia. I let it go to voicemail, but she called again immediately. Then Michael called, then David. They were trying every number they had for me. Finally, I answered Patricia's 4th call. "Marlene, we're downstairs. Buzz us up." "No. Don't be ridiculous. We drove 3 hours to see you. We're family." "You're here without an invitation, Patricia. I told you I didn't want you to come." "Open the door, Marlene. We need to talk about this situation you've created. The only situation is the one you're creating right now. Go home. We're not leaving until we see what you've done, until we understand how you could make such an irresponsible decision without talking to anyone." I could hear the anger building in her voice, the frustration of someone who wasn't used to being denied access to anything she wanted. "I'm an adult, Patricia. I don't need permission to buy a home. You need someone to talk sense into you before you destroy your financial future. Now open this door." "No." The silence that followed was ominous. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was cold and calculated. "Fine. If you won't let us up, we'll find another way." She hung up, and through my security cameras, I watched her turn to the man with the toolbox. They had a brief conversation, and he nodded, pulling equipment from his van. "They're really going to do it," I whispered, hardly believing what I was seeing. "They're going to break in." Diana was already on her phone. "Tom, it's Diana Fletcher. We need you at Ocean Vista Condominiums right now. We have a family attempting to force entry into a private residence." While Diana coordinated with the sheriff's department, I watched my family's next move unfold on my phone screen. The locksmith was examining the building's main entrance, testing the security system. Patricia was pacing, her phone pressed to her ear, probably calling the building management company. 20 minutes later, my worst fears were realized. Someone, probably building management, convinced by whatever story Patricia had spun, let them into the lobby. My cameras showed them crowding into the elevator, the locksmith's tools clearly visible in his hands. "They're in the building," I told Diana, my voice barely above a whisper. "Tom's 5 minutes out," she assured me, but I could see the concern in her eyes. They emerged from the elevator on my floor, a small army of determination and misguided concern. Patricia led the way, her face set in the expression I remembered from childhood, the one that meant someone was in serious trouble and about to be taught a lesson. The knock on my door was sharp and authoritative. "Marlene, open up. We know you're in there." I stayed silent, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it through the door. "Marlene, this is ridiculous. We're your family. We love you, and we're worried about you. Just let us in so we can talk." When I didn't respond, I heard Patricia's voice change, becoming more businesslike. "Get started," she said to someone, presumably the locksmith. The sound that followed made my blood run cold, the whirring of an electric drill, the scraping of metal against metal. They were actually doing it. They were drilling out my locks. Diana grabbed my arm. "We need to document this. Keep filming and stay calm. This is going to be over soon." The drilling continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. I could hear Patricia's voice through the door, explaining to the others why this was necessary, why someone had to save me from my own poor judgment. "She's clearly not thinking straight," I heard her say. "Spending her entire life savings on a place like this? She'll be broke within a year. Someone has to be the adult here. The adult!" At 54 years old, my sister still saw me as a child who needed supervision and correction. The lock finally gave way with a metallic click, and my front door swung open. Patricia stepped inside first, her eyes immediately scanning my living room, taking inventory like an appraiser evaluating assets. "Jesus Christ, Marlene," she breathed, walking toward my floor-to-ceiling windows. "What have you done?" The others filed in behind her. Michael looking sheepish but not stopping the invasion. David and Jennifer gawking at my ocean view. The locksmith gathering his tools like this was just another job. "This place must have cost a fortune," Michael said, his voice mixing awe with disapproval. "Marlene, how could you afford this?" Patricia was already opening cabinets in my kitchen, checking inside my refrigerator, examining my appliances like a detective gathering evidence. "She spent everything," she announced to the group. "Look at this place. The mortgage payments alone must be crushing her." "I don't have a mortgage," I said quietly from where Diana and I stood near the hallway. "I paid cash." The room fell silent. Patricia turned to stare at me, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked almost like betrayal. "You paid cash? For this?" "Yes." "That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money." "I had $250,000 in savings, Patricia. I used it to buy a home." "Your entire life savings? For this?" She gestured around my living room like it was a crack house instead of a beautiful oceanfront penthouse. "Marlene, that's the most irresponsible thing I've ever heard. What if something happens? What if you get sick? What if you need money for emergencies?" "Then I'll handle it. Like an adult." Patricia's face flushed red. "You're not handling anything like an adult. Adults don't make major financial decisions without consulting their family. Adults don't disappear without telling anyone where they're going. Adults don't shut out the people who love them just because they don't want to hear the truth. And what truth is that, Patricia? That you're making the same mistakes you made when you tried to start that catering business. That you're being impulsive and irresponsible, and you're going to end up broke and alone, expecting the rest of us to bail you out." There it was, the real fear behind all of this. Not that I'd ruin my life, but that my ruined life would become their problem to solve. "I'm not expecting anything from any of you," I said. "I haven't asked for help. I haven't asked for money. I haven't asked for advice. All I did was buy a home and move into it." "Without telling anyone," Patricia's voice was rising now, her careful control slipping. "Without asking anyone's opinion, without considering how this affects the rest of us. How does my living arrangement affect you, Patricia?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it, realizing she was about to reveal the truth, that my independence threatened her control, that my ability to make major decisions without her input challenged the family dynamic she'd spent years establishing. That's when we heard the elevator ding in the hallway, followed by heavy footsteps and the sound of a radio crackling with police codes. Deputy Bradley appeared in my doorway, his uniform and badge immediately changing the atmosphere in the room. Behind him were two other officers, their presence making my living room feel suddenly crowded and official. "Evening, folks," Bradley said, his voice calm but authoritative. "We got a call about a possible break-in in progress. What seems to be the situation here?" Patricia stepped forward, immediately taking charge. "Officer, I'm Patricia Williams, and this is my sister Marlene. We were concerned about her well-being and came to check on her." The door was unlocked. I looked at Diana, who nodded encouragingly. It was time to speak up for myself. "That's not true," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "They broke down my door with a locksmith. I have it all on camera." 6 months later, I was sitting on my balcony watching the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of gold and pink, a cup of coffee warming my hands, and Diana's latest novel open in my lap. The peace I felt was still new enough to surprise me sometimes, like a gift I kept forgetting I'd been given. The legal aftermath of that evening had been swift and decisive. Deputy Bradley had reviewed my security footage on the spot, watching Patricia coordinate with the locksmith, seeing them drill through my locks, hearing their conversation about forcing their way in to save me from myself. The charges were filed within the week: breaking and entering, destruction of property, criminal trespass. Patricia had been furious, of course. She'd hired a lawyer and tried to argue that family concern justified their actions, that they'd been conducting a wellness check on someone who might be mentally unstable. But Diana's legal expertise proved invaluable. She'd helped me document everything: the Facebook posts announcing their intention to force a confrontation, the text messages demanding access to my home, the clear evidence that this was about control rather than concern. The case never went to trial. Patricia's lawyer eventually advised her to accept a plea agreement that included restitution for my door and locks, a formal apology, and a restraining order that required her to stay at least 500 feet away from my building. Michael, who'd been charged as an accessory, received community service and was required to attend anger management counseling. But the real victory hadn't been legal. It had been personal. 3 weeks after the break-in, I'd received a letter from my mother. I'd been dreading contact from my family, expecting more guilt and manipulation, more attempts to make me feel responsible for the chaos Patricia had created. Instead, Mom's letter had been a revelation. "Marlene," she'd written in her careful cursive, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I owe you an apology. I've watched Patricia bully you for years, and I never said anything because it was easier to let her manage the family dynamics than to deal with the conflict myself. I was wrong. You have every right to live your life without asking permission from anyone, including your family. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, and I'm sorry it took something this dramatic for me to say so." The letter had made me cry for an hour, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in 15 years, someone in my family had validated my right to make my own choices. Mom had visited last month, taking the train down from Charlotte and staying in the guest bedroom I'd finally furnished. She'd been amazed by my oceanfront home, not critical or worried about the expense, but genuinely happy that I'd found a place where I felt comfortable and peaceful. "You look different," she'd said on her first morning, as we sat on the balcony drinking coffee and watching dolphins play in the distance. "Lighter somehow, like you're not carrying the weight of the world anymore." She was right. The constant anxiety I'd lived with for so long, the worry about disappointing people, the fear of making the wrong choice, the exhaustion of trying to earn love from people who withheld it as a form of control, all of that had lifted. I slept better, ate better, laughed more easily. I'd even started dating again, something I'd thought was behind me at 54. His name was Robert, and I'd met him at the community center where I'd started volunteering, teaching cooking classes to seniors. He was a retired high school principal, recently widowed, with kind eyes and a gentle sense of humor. We took long walks on the beach, shared quiet dinners, and talked about books and travel, and the strange gift of starting over later in life. "You know what I love about you?" he'd said just last week as we sat watching the sunset from my balcony. You're not trying to be anyone other than who you are. There's no performance, no pretense. It's refreshing. I'd almost laughed at the irony. For 50 years, I'd been performing constantly, being the good daughter, the helpful sister, the grateful divorcee who didn't ask for too much. Only now, in this place I'd created for myself, had I finally stopped auditioning for acceptance and started simply existing. The woman I'd become in these 6 months was someone I was still getting to know. She spoke up when she disagreed with something instead of staying silent to avoid conflict. She bought expensive wine without checking her bank balance first. She said no to invitations she didn't want to accept, and yes to experiences that excited her. She'd booked a trip to Italy for the fall, something the old Marlene would never have considered. Too frivolous, too expensive, too self-indulgent. Patricia had tried to contact me several times, despite the restraining order. She'd sent letters through Mom, emails from fake accounts, even had mutual friends call to plead her case. The message was always the same. She was sorry for how things had escalated, but she'd only been trying to help. If I would just be reasonable, we could work things out. But I'd learned to recognize manipulation dressed up as concern. Patricia wasn't sorry for violating my privacy and autonomy. She was sorry she'd been caught and faced consequences. She wasn't interested in respecting my boundaries. She wanted me to drop those boundaries so she could resume her role as the family authority figure. I'd stopped responding to her attempts at contact months ago, not out of anger, that had faded surprisingly quickly, but out of a clear understanding that some relationships were too toxic to salvage. Patricia would never see me as an equal adult capable of making my own decisions. She would always see me as someone who needed her guidance and control. And I would never again accept being treated that way. Michael had reached out more genuinely, sending a card on my 55th birthday with a note that said simply, "I was wrong to be part of what happened. I hope you're happy." It was a small gesture, but it meant something. Maybe someday we'd be able to have a real conversation, but I wasn't holding my breath. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Diana knocked on my balcony door, interrupting my morning reverie. She was dressed for her daily beach walk, wearing the sun hat I'd bought her for her birthday, and carrying the metal detector she'd recently developed an obsession with. "Coffee's still hot if you want some," I called out. "Can't stop long," she said, settling into the chair next to mine. "Ruth's expecting me at 9 for treasure hunting. She swears she saw someone drop jewelry near the pier yesterday." I smiled, thinking about how my circle of friends had expanded in ways I'd never expected. These women, Diana, Ruth, Margaret, Carol, had become the family I'd chosen for myself. They celebrated my successes without jealousy, supported me through difficulties without judgment, and respected my autonomy even when they disagreed with my choices. "Any word from that handsome principal of yours?" Diana asked with a knowing smile. "He's taking me to dinner tomorrow night. Somewhere fancy, he says, so I should dress up. It's been 6 months since you met him. Think he's getting serious?" I considered the question, surprised by how comfortable the possibility felt. Maybe. And maybe I am too. The old Marlene would have been terrified by the prospect of another serious relationship, convinced she'd somehow mess it up or choose poorly again. But this version of myself trusted her own judgment, knew her own worth, and understood that love shouldn't require her to diminish herself to make someone else comfortable. Diana left for her treasure hunt, and I returned to my novel, but found myself thinking instead about the woman I'd been just 6 months ago. The one who'd accepted exclusion as normal, who'd believed that asking for respect was asking for too much, who'd spent decades trying to earn love from people who'd already decided she wasn't worth their full attention. That woman felt like someone I'd known long ago, someone I had compassion for but couldn't quite recognize as myself anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Looking forward to tomorrow night. I have something special planned." I smiled, typing back, "Me too." The ocean stretched endlessly before me, constant and changing, indifferent and welcoming. I'd learned to love its moods, the gentle lapping of calm days, the dramatic crashes of storms, the infinite variations of light and color that painted new masterpieces every morning and evening. It reminded me that some things endure not by fighting the currents, but by learning to move with them. That strength isn't always about resistance. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let go of what's holding you back and trust yourself to find your way to shore. I'd spent 54 years learning to shrink myself to fit other people's comfort levels. Now I was learning to take up exactly as much space as I needed, to speak as loudly as I wanted, to shine as brightly as I chose. And for the first time in my life, I was home. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.